The NBA season has concluded with the Oklahoma City Thunder crowned as the 2025 NBA champions, and today I'm going to give you my finals recap after the culmination of an incredible season that they had. I'm going to go over some of the trends and strategies that helped them win, as well as the issues both teams faced and how each can improve next season. Additionally, we got some pretty major trades happening already in the offseason, with Desmond Bane headed to the Orlando Magic, and of course the long-awaited news of Kevin Durant being traded to the Houston Rockets. So I gotta talk about those. And then lastly, because it's literally been months since I dropped anything hip-hop related due to the playoffs, I will end the episode sharing some brief thoughts on Lil Wayne's The Carter 6, Slick Rick's Victory, and Clipse's So Be It, their latest single for their upcoming album, Let God Sort 'Em Out. So I'm going to share some of my experience listening to those albums, and then also share my experience at the Kendrick Lamar and SZA Grand National Tour I was able to attend earlier this month. So lots of great stuff to get into on today's show. I'm so excited to get into it all. As always, I hope you are, and you got your popcorn ready for another episode of Hip to the Games. Welcome to Hip to the Games, the podcast for you, the basketball junkie and the hip-hop head. I'm your host, Desmond, and I too have had hoop dreams and enjoy the beautiful genre of hip-hop and its history. Together, we will enjoy some of the greatest albums, songs, artists, players, moments, teams, and so much more, while even mixing the two on occasion, all in my hope that you remember why you love both or either of these to begin with. You'll soon understand that Hip to the Games is more than just a podcast, it's a lifestyle. And if you were looking for a platform that combines both basketball and hip-hop, you've come to the right place. They play my kind of basketball. And a lot of layers to this song if you're really paying attention. Here's a huge shout out to you for being hip to the games. Welcome to this episode of Hip to the Games. Shout out to you if you are a loyal listener and are showing that you are indeed hip to the games by listening or tuning in visually for another episode. Whether you are listening on your favorite audio platform or watching on YouTube, I sincerely thank you for all your support. And if you do happen to be new to H2DG, welcome. I am happy to have you here and a part of the H2DG family. If throughout this episode you do like what you're hearing, be sure to hit that subscribe button or that follow button on whatever platform you're listening to or watching on to stay tapped in with all things hip to the games. And before we really get into today's episode, you already know the drill. I gotta get my pregame shoutouts out the way, okay? The first one always goes to the creative director, Jesus Christ, for another H2DG episode, as it's always a blessing to get in front of this microphone and do what he's placed in my heart to do. And the second one goes to my 19 Media Group family for the opportunity to represent the home team. All right, you always see that blue and white logo sitting in the corner. That's the home team. That's my squad. Be sure to follow 19 Media Group on Instagram, 19 Media Group on YouTube, 19M Group on Twitter to follow everything going on with the network. We have a variety of shows around sports, music, education, culture, hosted by some passionate, independent podcasters and teammates of mine. And I'm sure you can find another show to support, whether that's through likes, comments, reposts, listens, buying merch. Trust me, as an independent podcaster, all of that is seen and felt and appreciated. Now, as we get into today's show, if you are a returning listener, you already know how I do. But if you are new to the show, it's only right that this episode is going to return to the format that pays homage to the classic hip hop song structure. Okay, I got 3 verses for you today, which represents 3 topics for the show. Okay, the first verse sets the tone. The middle one has to bring the climax or rising action. And then your last verse has to be the haymaker. It has to be the best for last and bring some sort of resolution or some kind of big bang at the end of the song. So since we always got to start verse 1 off with a bang, we obviously got to tip off with that NBA Finals recap. This year's NBA Finals matchup was every bit of the clash we all thought it would be. Such a tit-for-tat, yin and yang 7-game series. I mean, game 1, OKC fumbles after a dominant, and I mean dominant, defensive showing. The Pacers snatched their chain with another Tyrese Haliburton game winner and pretty much foreshadowed a 7-game series, I think. But OKC bounces back in game 2. They look more like themselves that game, only for the Pacers to get the first game at home in game 3. And then just when the Pacers looked like they were primed to go up 3-1 after a dominant showing in game 4, OKC had a gritty, old school fourth quarter where Shai Gilgeous-Alexander put on a masterclass that was reminiscent of those 2000s, 2010s, performances that we've seen from a guy like Kobe Bryant or any other, star player willing their team to victory. D Wade, LeBron has done it. Like, it was really that kind of ugly basketball. Me, I'm a sucker. I'm a sucker for ugly basketball. I'll admit, but for him to knock down those tough shots, get to the line, will his team to victory, even if it's ugly, that's what the playoffs are about. That's what the NBA finals are about. And that was such a dope performance from Shea. And then, OKC goes back home for game 5, right? And they gain control of the series with another convincing win over Indy. But of course, game 6 is the last time Indy's on their home floor for this season. And their backs against the wall, and they absolutely obliterated the Oklahoma City Thunder thanks to great defense and incredible team basketball that they really, have used the whole entire season, right, to keep their season alive. But then lastly, on Sunday, Game 7, we watched the Thunder equally thrive off their defense and home court advantage and fight for their franchise's first ever championship. Now, those are just the cliff notes, right? But I did want to highlight some of the players and trends from both teams that made this the awesome series that it was, because it's a lot more that went on than just my cliff notes. First off, I wanted to highlight the defenses of both teams, right? Because both teams thrived in transition. And that means that both teams thrive off getting turnovers. If you look at a lot of those games, usually the team that won was the team that forced the most turnovers and got out in transition. With Indiana, we saw it more with their full court ball pressure and forcing Shea to do a bulk of the work, which I think threw off their ball movement and allowed the Pacers to jump into the passing lanes. There were a lot of moments throughout the series where the OKC Thunder looked really stunned offensively. I think Rick Carlisle had a great defensive game plan for a majority of the series, dealing with a guy as skilled as an SGA, right? And deciding to eventually put Pascal Siakam on Jalen Williams, which I felt it put that adjustment put OKC on the ropes towards those last couple games of the series. I think a lot of people were getting more confident that Indiana could win this series because, again, adjustments like that, right? I think putting a bigger body on J-Dub kept him quiet. Just when he had the big game 5, game 6, game 7, he got a little more quiet because he had a bigger defender on him. So I thought Rick Carlisle, though they lost the series, he did an excellent job coaching this team. And I think for OKC, it came from their versatile, physical on-ball defense and ability to get strips and interceptions. I know a lot of Pacers fans, understandably so, were a little salty that OKC seemed to get a lot of calls that went their way, a lot of no calls on the defensive end. And my thing is, look, great defensive teams are physical. We saw this. I mentioned it before. You look at the '08 Celtics. I have been saying the whole playoffs, like, if you hate the OKC defense this year, you would have wanted the '08 Celtics in Rikers Island. You would have wanted the '96 Bulls in jail. Great teams, yes, there's some physicality. And I said that going into the series. The Pacers were not going to be able to win this series if they got in their feelings about the calls. And understandably so, right? Like, there was some frustration, but I did think they did a good job keeping their heads in the game and extended that series as long and as competitive as it was. So I was proud of the Pacers, but I did want to make that clear that great defensive teams, yes, they do happen to be physical. Lou Dort and Alex Caruso once again showed why they are the all NBA defenders that they are. I know a lot of fans don't like it, but it's old school defense. Active hands, moving your feet, getting your hands dirty, getting your body in there a little bit. Like, they did have a tendency to get away with that physicality a little extra. But again, when you're making that effort, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. But I think those two guys set the tone for OKC's defense. When they were successfully fighting over screens, getting steals, hustling after loose balls, the rest of the team follows. Because if you notice that game 6, there wasn't none of that. And as a result, OKC just looked dysfunctional on defense. So I thought those guys set the tone for most of the series. But again, like I said, I think this was a very yin and yang matchup with these two teams. If it wasn't OKC playing great defense, it was definitely Indiana and vice versa. Specifically, if we're sticking with defense here, you know I love me some good defense. Despite the loss, we gotta talk about Andrew Nembhard's defensive masterclass on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in games 1 through 5. They let up off it in games 6 and 7, but most of that series, Andrew Nembhard did an excellent job on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. You know, playing on the Canadian national team together, I think made Nembhard the perfect opponent for Shai, right? Somebody who knows this dude like the back of his hand, right? It's a lot harder to score on somebody that knows all your moves and the rhythm of your moves and how you like to get to your shots, what kind of shots and counter moves you go to. Andrew guarded Shai 94 feet most of the series and forced Shai to get lazy turnovers, either from trying to dribble past him or make a pass while crowded. I think Andrew forced Shai to make a lot of stubborn decisions, and that means that Shai had a lot of rough turnovers simply because of that defense Andrew played. You know, a player that wants to guard is one of the most frustrating players to play against. I don't care about your foot speed. I don't care about your active hands. While those things definitely matter, any player that is here in their minds sits down and says, it is my job to lock you up, those players are always the most frustrating to play against. And Andrew Nembhard, like I said, I can't say it enough. He did that versus Shai. I know they lost the series, but he did that, man. He guarded him as well as you can guard him. And I think while Shai did show some solid counter moves against Andrew Nembhard, I thought for the most part, he definitely made it very tough on the MVP. And I think with this in mind, in game 4, we saw Mark Daigneault make a key adjustment by using Shai in inverted pick and rolls to get switched on Nesmith, who was often in foul trouble, or even stay on Nembhard if Andrew fought over the screen. And the reason why that was good, no matter who was the defender on Shai, is because it allowed Shai to catch the ball at the nail and see the entire defense and work from triple threat. Get into his jab steps, right? And those one dribble pull-ups. We saw that in game 4. A lot of people were talking junk about Mark Daigneault. I peeped it because they felt like he had been lazy or he had been passive as a head coach. But again, sometimes, you know, don't mistake people's quiet nature for ignorance, right? I think he was just kind of waiting and seeing what was going to happen, and he made his adjustment at the perfect time. You know, I think that adjustment really got OKC through game 4, especially, and a little bit of game 5. You know, that's what great coaches do. You know, and we saw how detrimental it was for Shai trying to attack off the dribble every trip down. And I said it in the previous episode. Shai not having the off-ball aspect in his game is why getting free throws is so important for him. Right? This was something the Pacers were able to take advantage of. It is not good for scorers to do everything off the dribble. You are going to get exhausted and you're going to be more susceptible for turnovers because, again, if you're the Pacers, you're looking at this like, oh, if we guard him 94 feet and he has to dribble to get what he wants, and even then, by the time there's 10 seconds left on the shot clock, he's still around the center court logo, like, oh yeah, like, we're going to make him have to make a tougher decision. He's going to have to drive through contact, or he's going to have to drive into a double team, make a tough pass, you know, a tough skip pass, and we're going to jump in the passing lane. Like, it was a masterclass. The best scorers conserve their energy and still find a way to put pressure on the defense by being able to play off the catch. Again, if I'm getting into my little, you know, tangent, it's like, that was my problem with the way the game is played today. Again, it's very fun and everything. I don't have a huge problem with it, but you notice that a lot of the high usage players, a lot of the elite scorers are doing a lot off the dribble nowadays because it's turned into such a pick and roll heavy league. And we saw how detrimental that all that off the dribble work can do for a star player like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. But notice the minute he started getting touches off the catch, it got a little lighter for him. It got a little easy for him. You know, Andrew Nembhard did as well as he could, but he couldn't irritate Shai without him having a live dribble, right? Because now you're at the offensive player's mercy. It's like, oh dang, he can see the whole floor. You know, we're at the nail, so I can't really see behind me unless, you know, I'm in a more vulnerable position here. And you know, Shai got buckets. You know. I think guys, again, like Andrew Nembhard, Aaron Nesmith, they just suddenly found themselves at a disadvantage because they weren't able to push Shai off his spot, right? And getting his grill as easily as they were when he had a live dribble. So I thought that was a great adjustment from Mark Daigneault. Speaking of a live dribble, let's talk about the masterclass that TJ McConnell put on, man. I mean, Andre Miller with a Nash dribble kept his Pacers in a lot of games this series. Most notably games 4 through 7. He put on a absolute masterclass on how to get to your spots. He was unguardable. You play too tight, he drives right past you. You play too soft, and he pulls up at the dotted line. He gets a mismatch and just uses his crossover to throw off the big's rhythm, right? You cut off his right side and he still will slither to the rim and finish on the left side of the basket, or even use that Nash dribble to dribble around and go right back to the dotted line where he actually wants to get his shot off. You know, he was just flat out dominant, especially going right. You know, I was telling Devon when we were watching the games, I'm like, you know, I thought OKC could have done a better job forcing him left because he wants to get into that right pull up, right? And I felt like they didn't do a good job forcing him left. Like I said, you still probably would have gave up a layup because he's that talented of a player, but you know, I thought they could have did a better job. He wasn't always going left with the pull up. He very much favored that right side. So I thought they could have gotten his pocket, jammed him up a little bit, but you know, TJ did his thing, man, no matter how they were guarding him. And I think the only way OKC contained him was when they put somebody like Lou Dort on him, or they trapped him when he brought the ball across half court, right? So he gets across half court, there's a double team, and now he has to make a tough pass, especially as especially as a smaller defender, you know, who can't see over a taller defender in that situation. And even this, I'm talking about his offense, but I haven't even mentioned TJ McConnell's defensive impact yet, right? Like, people forget, a few seasons ago, TJ McConnell, I thought, was the steals champion, if I'm not mistaken. You know, he was always, even as a Philadelphia 76er, he was always a really good pickpocket, a feisty player. And he found a way to get sneaky rebounds and just play scrappy, in-your-face basketball. He is the epitome of a guy that just mucks up the game. And I said before the series, his rim pressure was going to be imperative if the Pacers wanted a chance, and his efforts were tremendous. He nearly willed his guys to a championship. I loved seeing how he played this series. And now another player who I thought was tremendous, and you may not have peeped this, but I thought he was tremendous, and he's actually a sleeper pick of mine. Isaiah Hartenstein. And I know what you're thinking. Des, he was quiet most of the series, but hear me out. I tweeted during this series that, especially in Game 5, Isaiah Hartenstein reminded me so much of Joakim Noah. Again, I had the luxury of seeing a lot of Joakim Noah being from Illinois, but like, on the surface, right, he was quiet, but he snagged a lot of key rebounds here and there, and he got back to being, I thought as the series progressed, he got back to being involved in those short roll situations, and even with all that, the attribute I loved the most was his passing. He had a lot of really good assists, especially in Game 5, and it looked exactly like what I saw growing up from Brad Miller, right, back in the day with the Kings and then eventually the Bulls. You know, and the same guy who later taught Joakim Noah how to patiently wait for your guard to cut back door, and you just feed him. Boom, you get easy assists that way. You know, or you come off the DHO and you just time that pass, right? Like, he was great in those situations, and for the most part made some key passes when his teammates were struggling to do so. When Shea couldn't get a rhythm, you know, getting his teammates involved. When J-Dub, all these guys, you know, like, I'm going to get more on this later, but OKC does not necessarily have floor generals and playmakers. So sometimes that was Isaiah Hartenstein making the right read off a DHO, making the right read off a short roll situation, trying to feed Chet or even Caruso coming from the dunker spot, right? It was those situations, and I thought he really stepped up in the small ways. You know, again, it probably didn't always show up on the box score, but that was something that I peeped, and like I said, it was most notable in Game 5. On the Pacers side of things, Obi Toppin emerged as a scoring threat that I didn't think he would become this series. Even in Game 1, he got hot from three, and for the most part, it stayed that way the rest of the series. He had plenty of momentum, you know, draining threes, and it was the exact reason why you love Pacer basketball, that anybody can go off, right? Anybody can go off, and he hit a lot of timely threes and got the crowd going, you know, great high energy player. Like I said, a perfect, you know, wide receiver, if you will, to Tyrese Haliburton's quarterback. I thought he had a really good series. I know Game 7 was rough, and it had came out that after the Tyrese injury, you know, he felt really bad because he was the one that passed him the ball. So that was all he could think about. So, you know, I feel bad that he had such a quiet and rough Game 7, but I don't want that to, get lost that he had a really dope series and he impressed me a lot. But flipping back to OKC, again, another guy was Chet Holmgren. And again, I think he had a shaky series offensively, but to me, he was at his best when he took more of that Rudy Gobert approach and took pride in his rim protection. Again, very similar to Rudy Gobert in the sense that these are skinny guys. There were moments where Chet looked a little lost offensively, but he made up for it on defense. Again, it was a lot like prime Rudy Gobert in that regard. Like, I thought that was a great sign of maturity from him, even at this young age. There were plenty of stretches this series where he struggled to score on the bigger Miles Turner, but still found ways to be impactful by altering and blocking shots on the other end, getting rebounds, occasionally getting putbacks. That's what champions do. They don't let the struggles of one part of their game affect another, and I was very proud of Chet this series. Now, I mentioned earlier how turnovers were everything for both teams in this series. Again, because they thrived off transition. When the Pacers got turnovers, they got to play fast. That's their bread and butter. When they played more half court, it was a bit harder to score, especially in games 4, 5, and 7, which was, again, that was my fear with this team, despite their excellent ability to get each other involved. But what surprised me about Indy was that they were the only team this playoffs to actually go with the strategy I initially was promoting ahead of the playoffs. Make Shai Gilgeous-Alexander feel like he's out there dolo. The Indiana Pacers, lo and behold, were the ones that did that and have and probably had the best series against this team in the postseason. They nearly went up 3-1 versus this team because of that strategy. And I think, like I said, I think one of the reasons why they lost is just they just didn't have a guy like Shai or even J-Dub. Again, what we saw from game 4 and even game 5, right, where J-Dub went off, like, the Pacers just didn't have that guy who just said, forget it, I'm getting 35, I'm getting 40. Like, despite a solid games 3 through 5, Pascal Siakam wasn't that consistent. While he showed he could get to the free throw line, Ben Mathurin was on and off. TJ McConnell, he was great, but I think, again, not enough to carry an entire team. That's just not his role. And even Andrew Nembhard, I thought he was surprisingly quiet. I really thought he was going to wake up eventually and really put his pulse on the game a little more, but it just didn't happen. And again, don't miss what I'm saying. The Pacers' team-oriented style is fantastic. If Ben Mathurin or Pascal Siakam had an extra game where they played really well, I'm sure they would be the ones with the trophy right now. They really were reminiscent of the 2014 Spurs. I got so many flashbacks watching them this series. Imagine if Ben Mathurin was getting to the line, knocking down jumpers, getting those quick burst 20-point games more consistently. But that was my thing with them going into the playoffs. I know it works and it nearly won them the title. But the casualty of team basketball is when nobody looks to make a play or they try to do so too late into the game because they don't want to deviate from the system. They don't want to deviate from the tried and true system that works. Siakam, McConnell, Nembhard, and Mathurin. These are all guys who are capable of making a play outside the lines, right? But I think we saw Indiana struggle with that at times, especially facing a defense like OKC's because, again, I said this with the Knicks series. The problem with the Pacers is when they face a defense that makes them sit with that ball, they don't look nearly as good as we know they can be. And we did see that. Again, they pushed this team to 7 games, nearly won the series, but we did still see that versus the OKC Thunder. But make no mistake, again, I know it sounds like I'm going hard on the Pacers, but even though they won the series, the Thunder had their flaws as well. There were some ugly things that went on this series for the OKC Thunder that nearly lost them this championship. When OKC played tough defense, they got transition points. But when they didn't, it was a lot harder to score because everything had to run through Shai, who honestly is more of a shooting guard than he is a traditional point guard, right? Like, he can pass, but it doesn't mean that he's a good passer, right? Outside of games 5 and 7, his reads weren't the best over the series, and it showed why once upon a time they paired him with a guy like Chris Paul, right? They paired him with a guy like Josh Giddey. But not having a floor general, that turned him into an MVP, if that makes sense, because, I think the playoffs showed that this OKC roster is just not built for him to put guys in position to score. So his dominance showed more with scoring. And then obviously, like I said, don't get me wrong, he had some great games this series, 5 and 7, where he was getting double teamed and just making the right pass. You know, his best playmaking performances were the ones where he was able to make the proper read out of a double team. And that's why they struggled so much to get assists and they experienced so many dry spells throughout a game, because they have guys that can make plays, but they aren't floor generals or game managers. They have guys who can shoot, but they don't have specialized shooters, right? That's why they ran into so much inconsistency. Alex Caruso can shoot, but he's not a sniper. You know, Cason Wallace can shoot, but he's not a sniper. Jalen Williams can shoot, but he's not Peja Stojakovic, right? Even Lu Dort, like I said, 41% three-point shooter this regular season, had a great game 1 where he went off. But that dude, he's not a sniper. You know what I mean? Like, he can shoot. It's not his primary job to come off screens and shoot threes, things of that nature. Like, they just don't have those specialized shooters. And though they won the championship this year, moving forward, what worked this year certainly won't work next year. Like, I hate to be the guy to already be like, oh, can they do it again? But real talk, I think if they think they can win the same way as they did this season next year, they got another thing coming. You know, Sue Bird talked about this on her podcast when discussing the New York Liberty, right? When you win championships, it's easy to say, oh, well, this is what we did last year. This is what worked last year, but it's going to be a new year. You have to throw all of that away. Teams are literally fixing their rosters, hoping to beat you this time around. OKC almost lost this year's finals. Shoot, OKC almost got booted in the second round in back-to-back seasons, all because they didn't have snipers and secondary playmakers. They have to make the proper adjustments this offseason to fill these holes. Because the Pacers, they had guys who had specific roles. That's why they found success, especially this postseason. But either way, both of these teams should be looking forward to making it back to this stage at some point in the future. They both have all the tools. You know, lots of teams are going to want the same thing. Ant-Man is hungry. Wemby is going to look to bring the Spurs back on top, right? Houston is knocking on the door even more now, getting Kevin Durant. You know, we'll see how the Lakers build around Luka in the future. And if teams like Boston, New York, and Denver get another chance down the line, you know, like there's some teams that are still trying to catch up. But I find it hard to believe that OKC won't have more runs in them. You know, they're so young. They're still getting better. You know, we'll see if Nikola Topic can get into the fold next season and provide some of that playmaking that they're going to need, that secondary playmaking. And obviously, like, you know, I anticipate a Tyrese Haliburton-led Pacer team is absolutely going to get another shot at redemption at some point. You know, so again, this was a really good final series. And as we know, the finals tends to preview what we might see, how the league shifts the next couple seasons. So again, it certainly won't be a cakewalk for either team down the line, but I do expect both of these teams to return back to this stage. And lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't give Tyrese Haliburton his more than deserved flowers for the playoff run he put together this year. He did everything you want your star, your leader, to do on that basketball court. He was consistently clutch when it mattered the most. He carried himself with respect. He celebrated his well-earned wins and kept his head high and took his losses on the chin. The Pacers followed his maturity tremendously. An excellent player with a future that is only getting brighter. Of course, I continue to send my prayers up for a patient, complete recovery and a positive mind for him after suffering this Achilles injury. You know, people want to see players play through injuries, and what did Tyrese do? He did that. He played in some of the most important games of his career so far, knowing the risk that it would take. And this is actually what I want everybody to understand about this situation, because there's a lot of discourse on the kind of ethics behind this. Now, first off, we knew how risky it was in the first place when it was announced he had a calf strain, right? We saw that it was very reminiscent of Kevin Durant. He got a lot of Kevin Durant comparisons because KD went through the same thing in 2019, had the calf strain, missed some time, was able to come back in the finals, and, you know, he hit a lot of shots. And again, it was very similar to Tyrese. Kevin Durant shot a lot of his first points. They were catch and shoot threes. He wasn't getting in his bag like that. He was letting the game come to him. He was feeling out that calf, seeing how he felt. He knocked down his first few jumpers. Now he's feeling himself. But the minute he decided to do just a little more, that calf gave out, right? And I don't remember who it was exactly, but I remember like a year or two ago hearing somebody say, the harsh reality of being an athletic trainer, especially at the professional level, is that their job isn't necessarily to heal players, right? Their job, at least during the season, is to get players well enough to play. Big difference. Big difference. And understand, their job is hard because they may know the right medical decision to make, yet they don't want to place doubt or regret in a player's mind. Relationships are everything, right? So if Tyrese says, I would rather deal with the risk of playing through this injury for a championship than live with the regret knowing that I probably could have played, but I chose not to. You know, the medical staff is going to honor that decision. At that point, he got a point, and I can't stop him from playing if he wants to play. So I'm going to do my best to get him well enough to be on the floor so he can do exactly what he said he wanted to do. And that's what we saw in Game 7. You can't blame Tyrese for choosing to play. Though it was just 23 minutes in a blowout game, you know, hey, I felt good last game. You know, with 2 more days of rest, I should be good enough to at least play one more game, right? This is Game 7. Like, I think we can manage this. And if it means I get injured this offseason, so be it. But I'm not missing this game. I'm not missing my chance to get a championship. And again, though it's ethically debatable, it made sense. But unfortunately, it just didn't end well. And here's where the on-court element of the situation comes into play, right? Because if you notice, like I said, very similar to Kevin Durant, Tyrese Haliburton was moving around the three-point line. He was just waiting for those catch-and-shoot threes, right? Those last 2 threes that he made were deep threes off the catch. He was ready. He was just sitting around the arc, waiting for the rock to eventually swing his way for an open shot. The Pacers are that good, right? Where the ball can move, and eventually it gets to Tyrese. They made the Thunder's defense scramble. Like they were doing really good early in the game. But again, when that happens, right? So Tyrese is sitting at the three-point line. He's not worried, you know, he's really not trying to put stress on that calf. And I credit him because it was a wise approach to this game. And it was paying off. But looking at that hot start, OKC knew that eventually they're going to have to run him off the three-point line. He's cooking right now. But what is that going to do now? Usually, Tyrese is just going to blow by his defender and get an easy layup or kick it out to a shooter. But with the calf strain in play, it now forced Tyrese to make a split-second decision to either stick to his approach and settle for the contested 3, or still do the smart thing and attack the closeout and drive, risking more stress on that calf with the same movement that often results in those lower leg injuries we see in basketball. Tyrese, you could tell he didn't want to repeatedly make those movements because he knew the stress it was going to put on his calf. But the way the game was going, it seemed inevitable that he was going to put stress on that calf with OKC starting to close out hard enough to take away his threes, right? And it was heartbreaking to see the result of that. I mean, man, that the reaction from Tyrese Haliburton, man, that'll make you shed some thug tears, you know? Cause, you know, even for me, man, that was like watching my little brother go down on an injury. You know, that was rough. That was rough. And additionally, I saw people urging to shorten the season again, right? Anytime somebody gets a career altering injury, everybody wants to suddenly shorten the season, especially now, right? We got Kyrie out, Dame's out, Jason Tatum's out, and now Tyrese Haliburton are all going to miss time next season. Superstars in this game are going to miss the entire season, most likely next year. But my response to that is, once again, 82 games was never the problem. It is the pace. The way the modern NBA game is played puts way too much stress on players' bodies. I said it before when referencing Joel Embiid. This game was never supposed to be played this fast for 48 minutes, 82 times. Not everyone's body is going to be able to hold up for a full season. A lot of these dudes are not meant to be running up and down the court like guards. We love saying that we're in the era of positionless basketball. We love saying that everybody's guard-like. We love throwing that term around, and then they get hurt. And then you realize That's probably why these big dudes was sticking they butt in the paint most of the time, because they not supposed to be making all these moves like guards do. And see, there's nothing wrong with the Pacers' up-tempo style of basketball, but I think when the game is already faster than ever, and even the slower teams of today are at a faster pace than teams 15 years ago, it makes very little room for balance. And while I know it's something Adam Silver can't single-handedly change, I fear that it's only going to take more injuries from superstar players for the league to wake up and say, all right, enough's enough. There's a reason why the traditional game was played the way that it was played. These guys' bodies are what's paying for the 100 miles and running style we see in the game today. It's easy as a fan to see the entertainment factor, the high scoring games, the depth that we see now. But when guys' bodies are paying for it, now at some point you got to look and think, okay, like something's got to change. But just like I said with Jason Tatum, I think this injury will allow Tyrese to work on his body and his mind, especially so young. You know, I think when you look at Tyrese, his frame, right? This isn't a guy with a lot of definition, not the strongest guy. And I think it worked to his benefit as a shooter, right? Like, smaller guys have a softer touch shooting the basketball. So yeah, Tyrese may not be as hungry to lift weights and really get chiseled and diesel because it may affect his shot. But now I think this injury is going to wake Tyrese up just a little bit and help him focus on how he can improve his body and figure out his body and what he wants it to look like and still maintain his skill level and you know, work on that as much as his basketball skills. And for that, I'm excited to see the fruit that comes out of this uphill challenge for him. This year's NBA Finals certainly lived up to the hype with a very entertaining 7-game series. But what are your thoughts on the Thunder's championship run? What's next for Indy if they want to get back here? Will they have a shot at redemption in 2 to 3 years? Be sure to share your thoughts with me down below if you are watching on YouTube, or at me on the socials at HipToTheGames or Desmond Powell _ to share your thoughts with me, as I would love to know what you think as well. Verse 1 is definitely off to a great start, but there is plenty more to come across basketball and hip hop as we transition to verse 2, where teams have wasted no time getting to their offseason trades. But before we get into those, if you like what you're hearing and want to know how you can support Hip to the Games in the form of fashion, here's how you can do that. As a fan of Hip to the Games, not only should you show your love for the podcast, but you gotta express your love for basketball and hip hop. With a wide variety of clothing and accessories, there is always a way to show how much the game of basketball and the game of rap means to you. Let everybody know what it means to be hip to the games by clicking the link in the episode's description to cop some merch and represent the H2DG lifestyle. Welcome back to Hip to the Games, and switching gears to more off-season related topics. Given this episode is being recorded before the NBA draft, I'm sure there are going to be even more trades to come this summer, but so far, the latest NBA trades have featured some teams, a couple teams from each conference looking to increase their championship odds. The Orlando Magic, the Houston Rockets, and the Boston Celtics. Now, first, I want to talk about the Orlando Magic receiving Desmond Bane in exchange for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Cole Anthony, and 4 first-round draft picks. While most of the focus has been on the Magic benefiting from Desmond Bane, I think this was a win for both teams, in all honesty. I think the Memphis Grizzlies are now able to surround Ja Morant with a 3-and-D champion in KCP, and they're also able to use Cole Anthony as a much-needed spark plug off the bench. If I'm Memphis, I'm going to see if we can keep Luke Kennard and then now bring in KCP, so then we can essentially have 2 reliable shooters to put around Ja Morant and kind of make up for that loss of Desmond Bane, who was a really good 3-point shooter. Obviously, Kentavious did not have the best year in Orlando shooting the basketball, but should he return to a more consistent percentage, I think this trade would prove itself to be nice in the long run, especially given his abilities as an off-ball defender. Similarly, Cole Anthony unfortunately found himself out of the Magic's rotation even after a couple seasons playing productive basketball. You know, there were even moments this past season where he found his joy and his role again after stepping up in the wake of injuries to key players. And again, I think Memphis's issue, their primary issue from day one in this Ja Morant era, has been shot creation. They just don't have it. Even after this trade, that hole is still there. I thought they should have went after Brandon Ingram the past few seasons. But of course, that didn't work out. He's in Toronto now. Jimmy Butler didn't want to play for this team. Kevin Durant had his eyes elsewhere. And so now I think that they should really try to get DeMar DeRozan, as it seems like he will either be in Miami or Memphis come next season. But of course, only God knows, anything can happen. But while Desmond Bane was awesome in that role for the Grizzlies, flirting with 25-5 averages the last few seasons, there were still so many moments the Memphis Grizzlies looked static on offense, especially versus OKC this year. It was legit like, I was watching a couple of them playoff games like, this looks like NBA 2K when it's the user versus the computer. Like, after a while, you just are able to lock up the CPU because you actually have a human brain. So you're winning by 20 or even 30 points and your defense is just on a string, right? Because the CPU just is not that smart. That's what it looks like watching the Memphis Grizzlies sometimes. But for me, if Cole Anthony can show folks that he's still a talented player in this league, I'm sure he's already looking forward to the opportunity to prove himself again. He will help the Grizzlies, especially off the bench, tremendously. But he cannot do it by himself. Like I said, there is still a hole for a shot creator. And as for KCP, he will help spread the floor and serve as an extra perimeter defender. And again, in the event they lose Luke Kennard in free agency, now KCP serves as a more than solid replacement due to his ability to contribute on both ends of the floor. That's the thing about Luke Kennard. As accurate as a three-point shooter that he is, he often gets played off because of his defensive limitations. So getting KCP, I see their vision for kind of bulking up that defense a little bit and maintaining some of their three-point shooting. And, I think if all else fails, if I'm wrong about all of this, they still have those 4 first-round picks that they can either keep or trade in the effort to get another star or just more help alongside Ja Morant and maybe, Jaren Jackson Jr. So even then, say the 2025-26 season is underwhelming for the Memphis Grizzlies, they still have options to work with centered around those draft picks. So an overall solid move for Memphis. Now, on the flip side, the Orlando Magic got a much-needed score at the guard spot. And it was very interesting because Ant Simons' name was thrown out there a lot. Kobe White's name was thrown out there a lot. Even Trae Young's name was thrown out there, only for them to end up what is probably the better option in Desmond Bane. And I say that because obviously Trae Young looks ready to lead a hopefully healthy Hawks team to a deep run next season, especially with the East kind of looking as open as it's going to look next year. Ant Simons is an awesome talent, but admittedly, he has questionable shot selection at times, as cold as he can be. He's a great scorer, very talented, but and of course now we see how that played out. He's going to Boston, more on that later. And then Kobe White, right? He's had some really good seasons with Chicago the last couple seasons. But funny enough, Desmond Bane has generally had better assist numbers than both of those guys, Ant Simons and Kobe White, and has a higher three-point percentage as well. And to me, that was the difference. That is why you get Desmond Bane. Because not only is Desmond Bane capable of playing off the dribble, but he gives good effort on defense, is a stronger body to guard multiple positions on the floor, and more importantly, he does not need the ball to be effective. He can fit as a spot-up option with Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner handling the ball. That's the big thing with Desmond Bane. That was the ultimate reason why they mutually agreed on Desmond Bane. Desmond Bane even said on the Young Man in the 3 podcast, right? Like, he was looking at Orlando because he knew this, and he's eager to help Orlando solve their league-worst three-point shooting issue. And after watching this year's playoffs, not only will he help them from deep, but he should be able to take some pressure off Paolo Banchero and make plays off the dribble on occasion. The Celtics, they were able to bait Paolo to settle for mid-range jumpers on a repeated basis because he just, they were clogging the paint so he couldn't bulldoze his way through. It forced the Magic to be very predictable and dry, especially because of their three-point shooting woes. They couldn't shoot threes, they didn't have many playmakers, and the shot creation generally came from one player. As competitive as they showed themselves to be, it just wasn't a great recipe to have a long-lasting playoff impact. While more players have to improve from three-point land, Desmond Bane is a great acquisition to help them get to where they want to be, especially in an Eastern Conference that may look very different next season with the Bucks, Pacers, and Celtics all missing star players due to injury. This was a real nice win-now move, I think, for the Magic, who, by the way, might have the best jersey rotation next season. So, dope stuff all around going for the Orlando Magic. Now, sticking south, this time in the Western Conference, the Houston Rockets are the latest team to fill a hole in their offense by acquiring superstar Kevin Durant in exchange for the 10th overall pick, 5 second-round picks, Jalen Green, and Dillon Brooks. And to me, this trade was fantastic by Houston. They were already a great defensive-minded group, so they could afford to sacrifice one of those defenders in order to get a star via trade. And we knew it wasn't going to be Amen Thompson, who pretty much became untouchable this season. And then they decided to stay younger by keeping Tyrese. And then, I felt bad for Dillon Brooks because he chose to go to Houston in free agency 2 seasons ago. But it's a business. And he now has a unique opportunity to help a Phoenix team that desperately needs some changes. And of course, even after a hot month or two of hoops prior to the All-Star break, Jalen Green was involved in this deal because at the end of the day, he was a talented scorer, but not necessarily a reliable scorer. He was super streaky in his first playoff series. Unfortunately, having more single-digit games than double-figure games scoring the basketball. And, anytime you have the chance to turn that kind of player into a guy that can still get you 27 points in his sleep at an efficient all-time rate, 1 dribble pull-up, 2 dribble pull-up, hezzy pull, doesn't matter what you do, is cash. And Kevin Durant, you take that every single day of the week. And keep in mind, teams have been able to see just how important depth is after watching the success of teams like the Thunder and the Pacers, right? And I think we all knew the Rockets postseason would have went way different if they had a reliable go-to guy. Well, they have that now in Kevin Durant. And if I'm Ime Udoka, a lineup of Fred VanVleet, Amen Thompson, Tari Eason, Kevin Durant, and Alperen Sengun is legit. Fred and KD, they can get buckets, but obviously Fred VanVleet is going to be able to do some floor general type creation for them. I think even Amen Thompson, if he can continue to grow as a playmaker, he can do a little bit of that. But again, he's also going to be the guy that attacks downhill. Amen Thompson and Tari Eason, they can take turns guarding the opposing team's best players. Sengun, he's definitely still going to get his post touches for balance, right? KD is a guy, great plug-and-play player, loves to play the game the right way, right? So he's not going to come out here, be selfish, and try to get 30. He wants the Rockets to still be themselves, it's going to be a fun situation for KD. Because especially when you think, he hasn't really been this much of a top dog, per se, probably since 2021 in the playoffs when Kyrie and James Harden were both hurt with injuries. So, I'm excited to see them to see him on this kind of roster. But you want to know actually what I'm excited for even more than that, though, is the fact that Jabari Smith Jr. is still on this team. I really was telling, when the KD rumors first came into play, I was like, man, Jabari Smith, this is his opportunity to go somewhere else, again, like a Phoenix or somewhere else, and really get some minutes. He's been hungry for that. He's been hungry to show what he can do. And I thought he gave great spurts in the playoffs off the bench. I was very vocal about the Houston Rockets, finding ways to use him more. And now he's in this position to learn from a future Hall of Famer who made his exact play style acceptable in this NBA. Having a rotation of 2 6'10" guys who can score is such a dangerous cheat code if all goes well. That dynamic, ooh boy, I'm excited for that. I'm excited for that in a best case scenario situation. Now, additionally though, this trade is also going to open up more minutes for Reed Shepherd, right? Who was one of the best rookies in the summer league last year and just somehow couldn't find a fit in the Rockets regular season rotation. And then the best part about him is that he can shoot, which the Rockets still have to improve on this season. So him and KD in the mix now should help with that next season. Also Cam Whitmore, he should get more run. He showed flashes of athletic ability and scoring punches in limited minutes, similar to Reed Shepherd, right? We saw how high a lot of people were on him on draft day, and he's going to be able to have a big year this year. a lot more opportunity than he has the last season. I think just in general, right? Like, I love this trade on paper, and it's going to be a huge year for Amen Thompson, Reed Shepherd, Cam Whitmore, and Jabari Smith Jr., because Amen, even then, he still has to improve his 3-point shot, or teams are gladly going to leave him to double team Kevin Durant. Reed Shepherd, he's going to get the opportunity to be the primary backup. Cam Whitmore should get more minutes at the 2 and the 3 spots. And Jabari Smith, like I said, may finally get the chance to show what he can do on a consistent basis. I love the idea of them presenting a challenge to OKC next year, but only if they improve their spot up shooting abilities. Okay, you got your go-to guy in KD. Your youngins are going to be able to play, and they've had time to learn the game from the bench and whatnot. Have some time in the G League, but they still got to knock down some threes, this team. So, we'll see how that works out for them. And again, like I said, they definitely got their eyes on OKC next year. But then on the other side of this trade, right, even with the Phoenix Suns, we'll see if Jalen Green, if they reroute him, we'll see if he can get a fresh start on a team like Brooklyn and maybe form a scoring duo with Cam Thomas. Or maybe for me, right, I think a sleeper pick would be, the Detroit Pistons, man. Somebody, I would like to see Cade Cunningham with a 2 guard. I would like to see him with somebody that can get a bucket. Obviously, I think best case scenario, it's Devin Booker. But again, see if you can get Jalen Green. See if you can get somebody to go opposite of Cade Cunningham and really make that a fun situation in Detroit. Either way, I definitely don't think Phoenix is done making moves, as their shooting guard room is way too crowded and not at all cohesive. But as for Houston, like I always say, they are much closer to creating problems instead of having them after this trade. And lastly, at the time of this recording, Shams hit me with a last-minute trade to add to my notes for today's episode. And that is the Boston Celtics sending Jrue Holiday to the Portland Trail Blazers for Ant Simons and 2 second-round picks. Now, this is a dope trade for Boston because they do get younger and they steal a scoring threat that a lot of teams would have liked to have. And obviously with Jason Tatum's absence next season, some extra points were going to be nice to have. An extra offensive burst was going to be nice to have. And the Celtics have indeed extended their scoring depth by acquiring one of the more streakier ones in Ant Simons. Now, with that in mind, I think it's really cool that they can start Peyton Pritchard and let Simons come off the bench, or even vice versa, as they both have shown to be spark plugs in this league. I believe Peyton has earned the right to start. I do believe he's put his time in. He's paid his dues. He's improved his game. He's stuck with it even after demanding a trade a few seasons ago. But at the same time, I wouldn't be mad if he does a Manu Ginobili, Jamal Crawford, Lou Williams, right? And solidify a home as the 6th man and say, you know what? I like this. I like being able to lead the second unit. I can kind of be my own star in this role. So, we'll see how they deal with that. But, like I said, with Tatum out, I think Jaylen Brown has to be excited, right, to now have a nice trio of guys who can score in Peyton Pritchard, Derek White, and now Ant Simons. And while I certainly wouldn't mind if he did, I don't think Jaylen Brown has to worry about having some crazy career year because he's got a lot of offensive help right here. This is easily a situation where Jaylen Brown could be like, all right, now's my time to score 28 a game, 30 a game, and show people what I can do. But I don't think he has to do that. I think he can still play within the flow of the game and not force things offensively. And I think even with Jrue out of the picture now, I think Jaylen Brown can kind of fill that role a little bit as a more physical defender, a stronger presence. I think it'll allow him to kind of do some of the things that Jrue was able to do. I'm anxious to see how Jaylen Brown approaches this situation on both ends. And, I think with Jrue getting older, he wasn't going to be able to provide that same offensive burst he once was kind of capable of bringing to a game. We saw that more so in Milwaukee, right? But again, I think we're looking at who just made the NBA Finals, right? Long term, how are we going to keep up with a team like the Indiana Pacers? We're going to have to score the ball. And the Celtics did that. And I said it before, Joe Mazzulla, he seemed to value offensive firepower a lot more than Ime Udoka did. Ime is more defensive minded, while Joe Mazzulla seemed to be a lot more embracing of the high octane offense, like the more scoring, the better. And I think that's what this move, this move really proves that to be true. And then that said, though, I still think they have to consider the defensive identity that they've had over the years. because Ant Simons is not the defender Drew Holiday has been for Boston. So they will lose a lot of that by trading for him. There were games, like I said, if you watch the Knicks series, there was a play where, Drew Holiday, he's playing on-ball defense. He goes over the screen. Then he has to run back and recover due to switching and rotations. He still runs back and switches on Karl-Anthony Towns, right? So no longer is he on the point guard, but now he's guarding the opposing team's center and holding his own in the post, contesting a shot, right? Like, you lose, man, that defensive versatility, man, you lose that with Ant Simons by getting him. So that's going to be interesting to see. But nonetheless, should he remain a Boston Celtic beyond this upcoming season, it does give them another guy who can fit with this younger, established core for a nice amount of time. And even if this is a 1-year rental, with an expiring contract, they can still flip him for another solid piece, right? A lot of teams are still going to want Ant Simons' scoring punch. So, they don't really lose here. As for the Blazers side of things, I love that this time it seems as if Drew Holiday is going to stay there in Portland as a veteran presence, a leader, a champion, and a defender on a youthful team on the rise. Remember, they originally traded for Drew Holiday in the deal that sent Damian Lillard to the Milwaukee Bucks before he was bought out. And while I do understand that Drew's contract is heavy, I've always been a fan of defense. And knowing that Chauncey Billups potentially has Drew Holiday, Toumani Camara, Denny Avdia, and maybe even Matisse Thybulle as viable perimeter defenders to work with however he wants, that kind of gets me excited. I'm not going to lie. I'm already picturing facing a team like OKC, and you can throw all those different looks at Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and even J-Dub, right? And then think about this too. You got Donovan Clingan as an interior presence. And then if they were to keep Robert Williams, it can get even scarier. All that defense just, guys, it has me a little hype right now, But, similar to what I said about the Rockets pieces, I just think this means that they are choosing to go all in on Scoot Henderson and Shaedon Sharpe offensively. Obviously Denny Avdia had a big year last year too, so, he's going to be in the fold, but it's going to be a big year for Scoot Henderson to continue to show and prove that he's ready to be a lead guard on a team that looks to, at the very least, taste the play-in. And it's about that time for Shaedon Sharpe to show that he can be a 20-point per game scorer in this league and maybe even reach all-star status, I think similarly to how Zach LaVine eventually evolved into a similar player, right? From coming into the league as an athletic finisher to evolving as a more, 3-level scorer. And again, with these guys getting these opportunities still young in this league, my only fear is the learning curve that comes with that responsibility, right? That comes with having to endure, with these bigger roles now. But the Blazers should hopefully be one of the more exciting young teams once again next season. And, I think adding a veteran like Drew Holiday to that mix should help them out a little bit. Obviously, Boston is not done. As rumor has it, they've been looking to offload Kristaps Porzingis as well. At this point, I don't even know. I think we don't even know if Peyton Pritchard is as safe as I believe he is. And then we still got to see if Al Horford returns to the squad. So Boston definitely has some more moves in them that we have yet to see. And you never know what Brad Stevens is up there thinking, so we'll see what they do. But for now, the first domino has fallen, and I think they really got a nice, talented young piece in Ant Simons. Who said we had to wait till July for the offseason to heat up, man? What are your thoughts on the teams that made moves already this offseason? How much better did the Magic get? Is Houston coming for OKC's crown? Where's Jalen Green's best fit? What's Boston cooking up for the future? Drop your thoughts in the comments on whatever platform you're on, or feel free to hit me on the socials. In the meantime, I'm going to take a quick break, but don't go anywhere, as we'll be finishing today's jam-packed episode with the last verse flipping to the other side of the H2DG spectrum. What's up? I'm Desmond, and I'm the host and creator of Hip to the Games, a podcast from 19 Media Group. From hot topics across the NBA, how can you say we done with the 80s or we done with the 90s, yet that's who we learned from? To album reviews and song breakdowns and everything in between, I take immense pride in genuinely appreciating the brilliance of basketball and hip-hop's past and present. If you too love the game of basketball and the game of rap, that means you're hip to the games. But no matter where you fall on that spectrum, I'm sure you'll find your place in the H2DG family, and I encourage you to join the fun. He has a little more knuck if you buck, if you will. every other Friday on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube, courtesy of the home team, 19 Media Group. Welcome back to our last verse of this episode of Hip to the Games, and finally, your boy is back with some hip-hop talk. Man, I know I told you before, that is by far the hardest thing about being hip to the games. Yours might be flipped, right? But for me, as passionate as I am about hip-hop, basketball has always been my number one. So, taking you behind the curtain, as I often do on here, for this year's playoffs, if you noticed, I really challenged myself to be everywhere. Like, if you noticed from the playoff preview onward, I was really just trying to come through with the videos, especially on socials, posting multiple times a day at times, just really trying to increase my presence a bit and overcome the kind of self-sabotage and imposter syndrome I tend to suffer from as a creator. And I think even because of that, right, I revived the TikTok account. I was posting on TikTok and, I just really wanted to test the waters and really, if I'm honest, just show the basketball world that Desmond Powell of Hip to the Games is really about this NBA-ish. And, sometimes, again, with my schedule and everything, and obviously I'm a human. I have a real life outside of this, so I'm not always as consistent as I'd like to be. But, the playoffs was my opportunity to really just show a lot of that consistency. And, so I say that to say that's why I was off to one side of the spectrum for so long. And although I still feel like I could have done way better, I'm still proud of how it went, and I look forward to the continued growth as always. And I certainly appreciate you sticking around, even without some of the hip hop content. But today, man, let's talk a bit about beats and rhymes, shall we? Because I've been missing it, man, and I know you have been as well. And first up, getting right into it, I actually wanted to start with my experience with the Kendrick, Lamar, and SZA tour. On June 6th, I was able to decompress from my life as a podcaster and attend the Grand National Tour, which absolutely filled my cup to the brim. I mean, I got to enjoy the experience with Devon and our sister. And anytime we all get together, I try to be really present. And if I'm honest, it was just absolutely amazing to just genuinely enjoy the show that was put together with two of my most favorite people in all the land and not have to worry about content. I think it was very much needed for me because I'm guilty of always thinking about the podcast, always thinking about content and worrying about the numbers and my consistency and my social media presence and all those things. And I felt like, especially around that time, I was just due for some genuine rest, if you will. I just really kind of felt that on my heart. So it felt great to have that time to just sit back, enjoy hip hop, enjoy live performances, and just be Dez, in all honesty. And now, as far as the overall experience, if you're active on social media and you're seeing all the fans that have attended the concert and they're saying things like, oh, it's 10 out of 10, I didn't want to leave, this is how life should feel like, Kendrick and SZA were great, all of that is 100% facts. Like, obviously, Kendrick performed a majority of the songs off GNX, but he definitely sprinkled in songs from all areas of his career, pretty much. And I thought the layout of the set list was impeccable. The transitions and everything, I thought it was a perfect ebb and flow of excitement, emotions, and themes. And as you know, I'm a bar nerd, I'm a performance nerd, and you and I bond over our love for the art of rap, and boy, when I tell you seeing Kendrick Lamar effortlessly perform with no background vocals was the dopest thing. We had a great view of center stage, and I made it my mission to rap along to the songs as if I was on stage with Kendrick. For the most part, I know you see the professional side of me on here, but because you're H2DG family, I couldn't leave you hanging. All right. Here's a look at how much fun I had because words just don't do it justice.
My left stroke just went viral. Right stroke to the baby in the spiral.
All right, your boy was wildin'. Your boy was hype. Your boy was hype. You know, you see that shaky camera footage. I thought I was going to be able to hold the camera. But yeah, that ended real quick. But you know, it's one thing to see the clips, but man, to be there in person, those videos that you saw, that was just the experience, man. It was such a once in a lifetime kind of moment, especially for Kendrick, right? As he's reached yet another level of stardom and skill, I would say. And then I even saw in a recent interview, you know, SZA was struggling with the thoughts of feeling like, you know, most people came to see Kendrick. They didn't really come to see me, and kind of struggling with that. And while admittedly, you know, I may have heard SZA for the first time back in 2015, when she was on Wale's song, The Need to Know. But outside of that one song, I was really only familiar with a few of her newer hits. You know, I just don't listen to her music like that. But, you know, I really entered the concert with an open mind, and she really ended up impressing me. Like, the mic was on, you know, her stage productions were incredible. You know, when her more intense songs like Nobody Gets Me, I believe it was, when that came on, you know, she had that stage on fire, man. It was slapping, and her guitarist was on point. Even some of the setup of the choreography reminded me of something from Aaliyah or even Michael Jackson would do. And like, don't get it twisted. You know, I may have been there for the hip hop, but SZA did her thing as well. She did her thing. And just overall, the synergy between her and Kendrick Lamar is just chef's kiss, man. Like, it was great experience. Great experience. Overall, like I said, the experience was a great start to the summer and definitely one of the coolest experiences of my life so far. But getting into these albums that have dropped recently, next up, man, the MC who taught us how to tell stories. The legendary Slick Rick released his newest album titled Victory, and Lil Wayne dropped his anticipated The Carter 6 album as well. And the reason why I'm kind of grouping them together here is because I've seen a lot of fans essentially say like, oh, Slick Rick at 60 is better than Lil Wayne in his 40s. And while I don't necessarily disagree with that statement, I did want to unpack it and show both sides. Because I think Slick Rick's album is what you typically expect from him, right? He literally talked his talk on I Did That, flexing his achievements and recognitions and contributions to this culture, right? As a pioneer in this game. You know, there's fables like So You're Having My Baby, you know, which can be a little humorous, but a little like realistic as well. And then the popular favorite, Landlord, is just so dope and like classic Slick Rick, man, as he raps from the perspective of a landlord who has to hunt down his tenant for their payment, right? And, you know, I think this is something that many of our hip hop pioneers share. And notice when I say that, I'm not even talking about rappers who have fame, right? Even the guy down the street who works at Walmart, but is, you know, he was rapping back in the day, right? Like, when you can always tell who grew up in that time period, in that era where the recording process was different, right? Like, you literally, everything was physical. There wasn't as much digital work as we see today. So they had to come into the booth prepared. They had to be ready to knock their verse out in one take, which means, like I always say, they didn't just have to have a verse, but they had to know their verse, master the breath control, the pauses, the enunciations, the vocal inflections, especially for a guy like Slick Rick, right? That's his signature thing, right? He's a storyteller. So essentially, when you're a storyteller, you got to know when to change your voice, especially if you're introducing characters in the story. Slick Rick, he knows how to, you know, include the ad libs, and he knows when to change his voice, right? There's moments where he raps like his regular self, but he might rap from the perspective of a woman, so he has to get a higher pitched voice, or maybe a child, right? So he has to sound a little more youthful. Like, point being, he had to know all those things going into his studio sessions. They had to be, you had to be as sharp as a draft pick, right? Like, you had to be as sharp as a, you know, number 2 pencil. You had to get in that booth and not play around. And so imagine developing that kind of military-esque discipline at a young age, right? And again, right, with that in mind, there are people in the military who have put those days behind them, but still they wake up at a certain time. They make their bed a certain way. You know, they have a specific routine that they do every single day because that discipline and that structure didn't leave them. Rap is the same way. So, yes, it makes total sense why Slick Rick at 60 years old sounds exactly how he did in his heyday and hasn't missed a beat. Because it's the homework. It's the master of the craft. MC. Master of the craft, man. It ain't no surprise he's doing this. He should be this excellent. It wasn't about streams and hits. These men and women were rapping for the love and the respect and the skill and the hunger, like all that. He's not trying to keep up with what these youngins are doing. He hasn't dropped an album since 1999. I was 1 year old. Like, to be away from the albums that long and just suddenly be like, hey, I'm inspired and I'm going to do my thing like I always did. He could have easily tried to keep up with the Joneses, but he knows his place as a pioneer. And this is, like I said, this is even with such a longer hiatus. You know, he stuck to his style. He stuck to his personality. And breaking news, it's not corny, because individuality individuality and originality is cool. It's actually genuinely a dope and fun listen, you know, and even I think Victory is a quick listen too. It's not, you know, Rick ain't asking for a lot of your time. He's getting his bars off. He's telling stories and you're out of there, you know, and even then it doesn't come off as rushed or lackluster. OG finally felt like dropping an album, so he did, and it's on brand. And it may not get talked about much, but let it be known, Slick Rick is still about that life, in case anybody's wondering. You heard it here from Hip to the Games. Now, as for Lil Wayne, I listened to it a few days after it dropped, so I had immediately seen all the talk of how his beats were trash and how he's washed. And, you know, once I listened to the album, I immediately thought of Eminem, because he went through a similar thing. Even if he rapped his tail off, people were still going to focus on the music, right? They were going to focus on the beats and or call him washed because it didn't sound like their peak performances and projects. And while I agree that there definitely were some beats that Wayne should have passed on, let's be clear about that. You know, I think a Cotton Candy with 2 Chainz, that actually was really catchy. That was some catchy stuff. I am not going to lie. But the beat, it just had me smiling and like chuckling, because like, these are 2 rappers, 2 Chainz and Lil Wayne. These are 2 rappers with some of the best longevity in the modern era. And they rapping on a beat that would play during the end credits of like I don't know, like if they made another Grown Ups movie or something like that. Like it just made me chuckle. And obviously, you know, the Peanuts to Elephant, that was noticeably bad. Like if you went on GarageBand and hit random, and no diss to the producer, but like to me, jokes aside, I genuinely think that Wayne was challenging himself as a rapper. Like when you've been rapping as long as he has and have been a rapper that's held in high regard, you're going to want something, almost anything different to challenge yourself. But this album didn't need that beat, man. And that was my main takeaway. These were just sparring sessions, right? Or shoot around, if you will, for Lil Wayne. Like, I think it threw a lot of people off because of the title. Obviously, when he comes out with a cover and you see young Lil Wayne on there and you see The Carter, you get hyped, because we traditionally know what the Carter albums, you know, what those entail and the history of those albums. And as iconic as his mixtapes are, like the Carter is his bread and butter. You know, so I'm with the people that have said that it's a lot more like a mixtape than an album. You know, shout out to I gotta shout out my homie, man, Nashawn. You know, if you're listening, bro, like that's my guy, big Lil Wayne fan, tremendous Lil Wayne fan. And he told me, he was like, you know, I seen it more like I Am Not a Human Being than a Carter album. And I totally agree. I thought that was a spot on assessment. Because, you know, you know, obviously I think Wayne at this stage, he has nothing to prove. You know, he can do what he wants. And like I said, there were still some good songs on this album. You know, I really liked Rari, the one with his son Cameron on the hook. Like, that was dope. That's a nice way to use you know, involve your children and you know, make a record that's actually pretty like dope. And you know, when you have an artist like Wayne who's given us classic features, verses, and albums, and like I said, is often held in high regard all time, if he just wants to rap for fun now, I totally understand. Sure, it's nice to see artists get older and, you know, show they still got an elite pen, but ultimately, he has nothing to prove. The album isn't great, it's not iconic, and while there are some hiccups, though, there are still some solid joints on this album, and I, for the most part, was okay with it, you know? So, you know, shout out Wayne, man. You know, it's always good to see the OGs doing what they do. And lastly, I almost forgot to include this, but Clipse had continued their long-awaited album rollout with their new single, So Be It, where Pusha T threw plenty of jabs at Travis Scott. Now, admittedly, I don't care much for that. I just got to be 100. I don't care much about that. I can't speak on that. I never got onto the Travis hype in the first place, so I'm indifferent with that. And likewise, even Pusha T, that's not somebody I listen to consistently. You know, I'm not going to be fake just because I have a podcast. You know, I love hip hop. You know, I love the art of rap. I love the craft of rapping, but it's a bit harder for me to listen to artists with subject matters I don't always resonate with, right? It's just not my everyday lane. That said, I am no stranger to Pusha T's pen, and I am no stranger to Clipse. And what I enjoyed about the reception of this song is that it's really got people talking about Pusha's evolution as a rapper. I've seen quite a bit of talk in regards to how Pusha T's luxury style of rap is reminiscent of what Jay-Z has done. I would say more noticeably in recent years than at his peak. You know, So Be It really sounds like those kind of post Watch the Throne or maybe 444 raps from Jay. You know, the single is dope. It's gritty. You know, it's kind of haunting, which matches Clipse's energy as they are set to release the album, which, like I said, had many hip hop fans on the edge of their seats. You know, Pusha's gonna talk his talk, and even No Malice, right? Malice was killing out there, man. He was right with him. I love how in that second, with his verse, he generally rode the same rhyme scheme for most of his verse, but it wasn't dull or repetitive. You know, I really enjoyed the energy they came with, and their synergy is just perfection. It really reminded me of what we see in sports, right? Like, because rap is sport, essentially, right? It's sport in the form of words and penmanship. I mean, come on, man. When you listen to the song, Push had a bar. He was like, cause hitters that I'm with like to draw when it's sketchy. I was like, man, come on. Hitters that I'm with like to draw when it's sketchy. Man, we can't keep acting like Pusha T don't got it, man. We gotta keep acting like he don't got it. Like, it made me think of too. I remember when I first got on TikTok a few years ago, and it was a little bit after the Pusha and Drake beef. And, you know, I shared a TikTok in response to a tweet that was essentially a rapper ranking. And in it, I did mention, like, I wouldn't be mad if you gave Pusha T the edge over Drake. And somebody replied, like, well, in what world is Pusha T better than Drake? Like, I don't really see, and I think they were genuinely asking, like, you know, I don't really see why, you know, people would say that. And in hindsight, I really think it's similar to what we've kind of seen from Michael Beasley in the NBA world, right? Like, he doesn't have the awards, but he has the respect. Real ones know how cold he is, and if you challenge him, he is going to step to you. And I think it's very similar with Pusha T. Sure, Drake has the awards, the fame, the stadium world tours, all this stuff, the Instagram quotes, and he is a very skilled and talented rapper when he's really trying to show that side. But head to head, especially with beef in mind, Pusha T is an enforcer. You don't just step to him casually. It's not a game to him. And while he's known for one subject matter for the most part, he's just as technically sound and sharp as a lot of the artists who have been at this rap thing for decades now. He is up there, man. And So Be It definitely shows that. You know, the album Let God Sort 'Em Out drops next month, so it'll be interesting to hear the full project. I know there's been some other songs that have leaked. I know the other single, what is it, like Ace and Trumpets or Ace Trumpets, something like that. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but, you know, generally from what I've heard, you know, this is going to be a dope album for Clipse, a dope return for them. I think the hype is there. I think the beats are hard. The features, you know, we're allegedly getting a Nas feature, a Kendrick feature. Those things have leaked. So, you know, they got a heavy hitter coming, you know, so it'll be interesting to see what it sounds like, especially because it's been a minute since their last album dropped. Now, before I go, I know there's been a hefty episode, but before I go, since the NBA season is over, I just wanted to give an outlook on what you can expect from me and Hip to the Games moving forward. First, I recently joined 19 Media Group teammate Tyler McDowell Blanken on his solo podcast 4AZ, where he highlights other educators in the Arizona area who are impacting the community through education. Although this season he's actually focusing on broadening his reach a little bit more, so I actually had the privilege of helping him tip off his second season of the show as a guest, discussing how artists like Kendrick Lamar can be included in education and curriculum. So that was a really fun conversation. You can find that on his YouTube channel 4AZ. In July, I will actually be returning to Wrestling and Life podcast Gimmick Infringement, also a part of the 19 Media Group family, with Tyler and his co-host Brad Winchester to discuss the WNBA season, similar to how we did last season. So be on the lookout for that. That's going to be next month. And as for H2DG, I definitely want to catch up and give you some fire song breakdowns. As always, recommendations are greatly appreciated. I have been toying with the idea of doing an album review from one of Kendrick Lamar's projects. I think it's only right, given my recent experience. But as you know, album reviews really take a lot out of me because we get into so much detail and discussion. But that is a goal of mine to do this summer that I can hopefully do. And of course, expect to see You Had to Be There episodes popping up this summer, right? The off-season exclusive that will feature friends and colleagues of mine reflecting on and giving flowers to their favorite and or oftentimes underrated NBA players. So in a general sense, there's still a lot to enjoy and look forward to with Hip to the Games as the NBA world gets quiet these days. But of course, with all of that said, we have finally made it to the end of another Hip to the Games episode. From the awesome NBA Finals series we watched this year to the NBA already cooking with some fire trades this summer and some hip-hop legends doing their thing for the love of the craft. I hope you enjoyed today's loaded episode, but as always, these were just my thoughts. So now I gotta hear from you. You can tweet the show at Hip to the Games or tag me directly on IG or Twitter at DesmondPowell_ and share your thoughts on any of the topics discussed today, as I would love to hear or read your thoughts. And I simply want to say thank you for listening to another episode of Hip to the Games, all for the love of the best combo there is. And thank you for being hip to the games in the first place and rocking with your boy. All right, peace out and God bless. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Hip to the Games, and if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit up the socials at DesmondPowell_ and at Hip to the Games on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok so you don't miss out on the fun. And please follow or subscribe to the show and leave a review on the podcast platform you're on right now, as your support is greatly appreciated.